Colonel Mira Landon stood at the viewport of the Aurora platform, gazing out at the frozen rings of Saturn that embraced Titan's orange haze like a celestial crown. The weapons platform had been her home for 3 years now, a relic of humanity's earlier attempts to establish a foothold in the outer solar system, before the Galactic Council had arrived and changed everything. "Colonel!" Lieutenant Harper's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Young, earnest, with an optimism that felt increasingly out of place on the frontier. "The Council representatives are demanding another inspection. Third one this month." Mira's jaw tightened. "Let me guess. Checking for unregistered weapon systems again?" "Yes, ma'am. They claim it's standard procedure." "Standard harassment," Mira muttered. She turned away from the viewport, her reflection fading from the reinforced glass. At 42, the lines around her eyes had deepened, and streaks of silver now adorned her once midnight hair. "Tell them we'll comply. As always." Harper hesitated. "Some of the crew are asking questions, ma'am, about why we keep allowing these inspections when New Geneva Colony is still rebuilding after the Council's peacekeeping operation last year." Mira studied the younger woman, recognizing the fire of indignation she herself had once carried. "Because we follow orders, Lieutenant. Even the ones we don't like." She tapped the console, bringing up the station systems. "Have Dr. Varon prepare the manifests. And Harper," she paused, "make sure everything is exactly by the book." "Yes, Colonel." After Harper left, Mira returned to the viewport. Beyond Titan's haze, Earth was just a pale blue dot from this distance. Home, or what used to be home before humanity had expanded throughout the solar system, and then beyond, establishing colonies on exoplanets that had seemed promising, until the Council arrived, claiming authority over all developing species in this arm of the galaxy. Her comm unit chimed, interrupting her thoughts. "Colonel Landon," she answered. "Mira, it's Ilya." Dr. Ilya Varon, the station's chief engineer, and one of the few people who still called her by her first name. "You should come to the command center. Now." Something in his voice made her blood run cold. "On my way." The command center of Aurora was a circular chamber embedded deep within the platform's core. When Mira entered, all eyes turned to her briefly before returning to the main display screen. Dr. Varon stood near the central console, his tall frame hunched forward, hands gripping the edge of the terminal. His knuckles were white. "What is it?" Mira asked, though the answer was already playing out before her on the screen. "Distress signal from the Enceladus refugee convoy," Varon said, his Russian accent thickening with emotion. "They were en route to the Proxima colonies when—" The footage showed it all, a flotilla of unarmed transports, carrying some 15,000 human refugees from the recently reorganized Mars settlements. Council warships had appeared from nowhere, surrounding the convoy. There had been no warning, no demands for surrender, no chance for escape. Just methodical, clinical destruction. Mira watched in horror as the ships, filled with families, children, were systematically targeted. The bridge fell silent except for the staticky transmission. Someone was sobbing quietly at a rear console. "How many survivors?" Mira finally asked, her voice unnaturally steady. "3 transports managed to launch escape pods before they were hit," Harper replied, her earlier optimism shattered. "Maybe 200 people, total. They're hiding in Enceladus's ice fields. Council ships are still in the area, hunting." "Why?" The question came from a young technician, barely out of academy training. "They were just refugees." "Because they could," Mira said, the cold anger settling into her bones. "Because we let them think they could." She straightened, feeling the weight of every eye in the command center. "Lieutenant Harper, I want all senior staff in the war room in 10 minutes. Dr. Varon, start warming up the defense grid. Quietly." "Colonel," Varon cautioned, "if the Council detects—" "I'm done worrying about what the Council detects." Mira's voice cut through the room like a blade. They just slaughtered 15,000 civilians. I think we're past diplomatic concerns. As she strode from the command center, her comm unit pinged again. This time, it was a secure channel, one she hadn't used in months. This is Landon. They hit New Anchorage, too. The voice belonged to Commander Reeves from the Galilean Defense Fleet. Same pattern as your convoy. No warning, no survivors. Council's claiming it was a necessary security action against seditious elements. Mira's steps faltered. How many? Colony of 8,000. Gone. She closed her eyes briefly. Stay on this channel. I'm calling everyone I know. By the time Mira reached the war room, reports were flooding in from across the frontier. The Council had launched coordinated strikes against human settlements throughout the system, focusing on refugee centers, newly established colonies, and outposts like Aurora that had once served military functions. When the senior staff assembled, their faces were grim, shell-shocked. Harper looked like she'd been crying but had pulled herself together. Dr. Varen was the last to arrive, tablet in hand. I have the reports from Europa, Callisto, and the Kuiper outposts, he said without preamble. It's the same everywhere. The Council is systematically targeting civilian populations. Not just civilian, Harper added. They're targeting refugees and frontier settlements, places where people fled after the Council's reorganization of the inner system colonies. Mira stood at the head of the table, hands braced against its surface. They're eliminating witnesses, she said. Anyone who experienced their first wave of peacekeeping and might resist the next phase. What do we do? Someone asked. We can't fight the entire Council. No, Mira agreed, looking up. But we can make them regret starting this fight. She activated the holographic display in the center of the table, showing the Saturn system and its surrounding space. Aurora was decommissioned as a weapons platform years ago, but only officially. We've maintained its defensive capabilities, and its offensive ones, in secret. We have enough firepower to defend Titan and strike back at Council forces in the area. Colonel, Dr. Varen interjected, even with Aurora's weapons, we're outnumbered. The Council has dozens of ships in this sector alone. We're not alone, Mira replied. I've been in contact with commanders from the Jupiter Defense Fleet, the Kuiper Border Force, and what's left of the Mars Resistance. They're all reporting the same attacks, and they're all ready to fight back. She looked around the table, meeting each officer's eyes. I'm proposing we form the Vigilant Legion, combining our forces for coordinated strikes against Council outposts. We hit them fast, we hit them hard, and we show them humanity won't go quietly into extinction. Harper straightened in her chair. I'm with you, Colonel. One by one, the others nodded their agreement, though Dr. Varen's came last and with obvious reservation. This means war, he said quietly. A war we might not win. This already is a war, Mira corrected him. They just didn't bother to declare it before they started killing us. As the meeting broke up, Varen lingered behind. Once they were alone, he approached Mira. Mira, I've known you for 10 years, he said. I've never seen you like this. She looked at him, her oldest friend on the station. You've never seen me watch 15,000 people be murdered in cold blood before. That's not what I meant, he sighed. Vengeance is a dangerous path, especially for someone who leads others. This isn't about vengeance, Ilya. It's about survival. She turned back to the holographic display, where red markers indicated Council ship positions. If we don't stop them now, there won't be any humans left to save. But even as she spoke the words, Mira knew there was more to it than survival. The cold fury that had settled in her chest when she watched the convoy's destruction, that was personal. That was vengeance, pure and simple. And perhaps that's what humanity needed right now. Within 24 hours, Aurora's systems were fully activated for the first time in years. Defense grids hummed to life, weapon batteries were charged, and the dormant engines that could maneuver the entire platform began their warm-up sequence. Harper coordinated with other resistance cells across the system, establishing secure communication channels and sharing intelligence on Council movements. Dr. Varon led a team that worked frantically to upgrade Aurora's sensor systems, allowing them to detect Council ships at greater distances. And Mira received the first piece of truly surprising news since the attacks began. "Colonel, we've decoded part of the Council's attack authorization," a communications officer reported. "It didn't come from the High Council as we assumed. It originated from a faction within the Council, something called the Purity Directive." Mira frowned. "Meaning?" "Meaning this might not be an official Council action," Harper said, excitement creeping into her voice. "It could be a radical faction acting without full authorization." "Does that matter to the dead?" Dr. Varon asked bluntly. "It matters to the living," Mira replied. "If there's division within the Council, we can exploit it." She studied the decoded transmission. "Save this. It might prove useful later." 3 days after the massacre, the newly formed Vigilant Legion launched its first strike. Aurora, now a fully operational battle platform, provided cover fire as human ships targeted a Council outpost on Rhea. The outpost served as a communications relay and supply depot for Council forces in the Saturn system. The attack was swift and precise. Legion ships disabled the outpost's defenses, while ground teams infiltrated the facility, downloading critical intelligence and planting charges at key structural points. They were in and out within 90 minutes, leaving behind a crippled facility and confused Council forces. No Council lives were lost, a decision Mira had insisted on for this first strike. "We're not them," she had told her officers. "We don't slaughter without warning." But she knew that restraint might not last. The next Council outpost might not be evacuated in time. The next strike might require more permanent measures. As predicted, the Council responded with fury, dispatching additional warships to the frontier regions and imposing even stricter controls on the few remaining human settlements under their jurisdiction. But the Vigilant Legion was always one step ahead, using the knowledge of former military personnel who understood Earth's old defense strategies. Mira stood in Aurora's command center 2 weeks after the first strike, watching as tactical displays showed Legion forces engaging Council ships near Enceladus. The operation was going according to plan, Council attention drawn to the Moon's North Pole, while the real mission, extracting refugee survivors hidden in the southern ice fields, proceeded undetected. "Council ships are moving to intercept," Harper reported from her station. "But they're targeting our decoys." "Maintain the deception as long as possible," Mira ordered. "How many refugees have we recovered?" "Extraction teams report 143 survivors secured," Varon answered, monitoring the comms. "Transports are beginning ascent now." Mira nodded, satisfaction momentarily easing the constant tension she carried. These small victories, saving lives the Council had marked for extinction, helped justify the path they'd chosen. The rescue operation succeeded, bringing the survivors to a hidden base within Titan's atmosphere. Many were injured, all were traumatized, but they were alive, and their testimonies added to the growing evidence of the Council's atrocities. Among the survivors was a Council administrative aide who had been aboard one of the refugee ships, having defected just before the attack. She brought disturbing news. "The Purity Directive isn't just a faction," she explained to Mira during debriefing. "It's a philosophy that's gaining popularity within the Council. The belief that younger species like humanity are inherently destabilizing to galactic order and should be contained or removed." "Removed," Mira repeated flatly. "Genocide as policy." The aide, Talia, nodded solemnly. "There are Council members who oppose this view, but they're increasingly marginalized. The attacks on human settlements were meant to be a test case, if successful. The directive plans to expand operations to other problematic species. This information changed everything. What had begun as a desperate fight for human survival now carried larger implications. If the Purity Directive succeeded in eliminating humanity, other species would follow. Mira brought this information to her officers, now expanded to include commanders from other Legion units. "We're not just fighting for ourselves anymore," she told them. "We're fighting to expose a cancer within the Council before it consumes other worlds." Over the next months, the Vigilant Legion grew in strength and daring. What had begun as guerrilla strikes evolved into coordinated campaigns across the outer system. For every Legion ship lost, 3 Council vessels were disabled or destroyed. For every outpost the Legion was forced to abandon, 2 Council facilities were rendered inoperable. But the cost was mounting. Civilian casualties, once carefully avoided, became an increasingly common reality as the conflict intensified. Council forces began using human settlements as shields, knowing the Legion's reluctance to endanger their own people. After a particularly costly operation on Enceladus, where Legion forces had been forced to strike a Council command center, despite the presence of human laborers, Dr. Varen confronted Mira in her quarters. 28 civilians dead, he said without greeting. Our people, Mira, killed by our weapons. She didn't look up from the tactical displays projected above her desk. The Council commander was using them as human shields. You know that. Yes, and we fired anyway. Varen's voice was tight with controlled anger. We're becoming what we're fighting against. Now, Mira did look up, her eyes hard. We gave them warning. We tried to evacuate the facility. The Council commander blocked the exits. So we made the calculation that 28 lives were worth sacrificing to kill 1 Council commander. To kill a commander responsible for the deaths of thousands, Mira corrected. A commander who would have killed thousands more. Varen shook his head. This isn't you, Mira. The colonel I've served with for 10 years wouldn't reduce human lives to numbers in an equation. The colonel you served with for 10 years watched 15,000 people die in a single day because she was following rules while the enemy ignored them. Mira snapped, rising to her feet. I won't make that mistake again. There's a difference between fighting and becoming the thing you hate, Varen insisted. Those 28 people, they weren't acceptable losses. Mira, they were people with names, with families. Don't you think I know that? Her voice cracked slightly. Don't you think I see their faces when I try to sleep? But what choice do we have? Surrender? Let the Purity Directive finish what they started? Varen's expression softened slightly. There's always a choice, Mira. Always a line we don't cross, or we're no better than they are. After he left, Mira stood at her viewport, staring out at Titan's hazy atmosphere. Varen's words echoed in her mind, merging with memories of the convoy's destruction, the testimonies of survivors, the growing list of the dead. Was he right? Was she crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed? Or was this simply the price of survival? 6 months into the conflict, the Legion had evolved from a scattered resistance into a formidable fighting force. Ships salvaged from abandoned human outposts, weapon systems repurposed from defunct Earth military installations, and tactics developed through bitter experience had transformed the once outmatched humans into a genuine threat to Council operations. Aurora had become the nerve center of the resistance, its position in Titan's orbit serving as both protection and strategic advantage. From here, Mira coordinated Legion activities across the system, managed supply lines to hidden human settlements, and planned the next phases of their campaign. Intelligence gathered from captured Council databases had revealed the location of the Council's regional headquarters, a sprawling complex on Galian Prime, a terraformed moon orbiting a gas giant at the edge of Sol's neighboring system. This facility served as the command center for all Council operations in the sector, including the Purity Directive's campaign against humanity. If we strike Galian Prime, we could cripple their entire command structure. Harper argued during a strategy session. In the months of fighting, the young lieutenant had shed her idealism for a harder, more pragmatic outlook. Our intelligence suggests that Archon Selk, The director of the Purity Directive is stationed there. Galleon Prime is their most heavily defended facility in this sector, Varen countered. The casualty projections are acceptable given the strategic value of the target, Harper interrupted. Mira noted the exchange with a mixture of concern and pride. Harper had grown into a capable officer, but her increasing willingness to accept casualties troubled Mira, especially since she recognized the same transformation in herself. Dr. Varen is right about the defenses, Mira said. A frontal assault would be suicide, but there might be another approach. She activated the holographic display, showing detailed scans of Galleon Prime. The moon's atmosphere is maintained by a network of shield generators. If we could disable those generators simultaneously, their defensive systems would be compromised while they diverted power to maintaining atmospheric integrity. A precision strike, Harper nodded approvingly. Small teams, high-value targets. Exactly. And while their forces are responding to the shield failures, we bring in our main assault group to target the command center itself. Varen studied the plan. His expression troubled but resigned. It could work, but we'd need inside help to coordinate the shield strikes. We have it, Mira revealed. Captain Ruka. The name caused a stir among the officers. Captain Ruka was a council security officer who had contacted the Legion 2 months earlier, offering intelligence in exchange for protection. A member of a species called the Nharu. Ruka had witnessed the Purity Directive's operations firsthand and claimed to be disgusted by the Council's new direction. Can we trust him? Harper asked. Her, Mira corrected. And yes, I believe we can. Every piece of intelligence she's provided has checked out, and she's risked her life multiple times to get information to us. The plan was set. 3 Legion strike teams would infiltrate Galleon Prime using stolen Council identification codes. Once in position, they would disable the shield generators while Captain Ruka created a distraction in the security center. As atmospheric alarms pulled Council forces toward population centers, the main Legion fleet would drop from hyperspace and target the command complex directly. The assault began at what would have been dawn on Earth, a symbolic choice that wasn't lost on the human forces. Strike teams slipped past outer defenses using the codes Ruka had provided, their small craft registering as maintenance vehicles on Council scanners. Mira led the 3rd strike team personally, despite Varen's objections. A colonel's place is in the command center, not on the front lines, he had argued. Not this time, she had replied. Some missions you don't delegate. Her team landed near the southern shield generator, a massive structure that pulsed with energy as it projected the invisible barrier that kept Galleon Prime's atmosphere from dissipating into space. Council security was minimal. They had never expected an attack this deep into their territory. Charges set, reported Specialist Quan, the team's demolitions expert. Ready on your mark, Colonel. Mira checked the mission clock. 2 minutes until synchronized detonation across all 3 sites. Stand by, she ordered, then activated her secure comm. Ruka, status? The alien's voice came through clearly. Security systems diverted as planned. Command center staffing at minimal levels. They suspect nothing. Understood. Proceed with Phase 2. Precisely on schedule. Explosions blossomed across Galleon Prime's surface as all 3 shield generators were destroyed simultaneously. Alarms immediately began blaring across the complex as atmospheric integrity warnings flooded every system. Council forces reacted exactly as predicted, rushing to evacuate civilian areas and activate emergency containment fields. In the confusion, the Legion fleet dropped out of hyperspace, led by Aurora itself, the platform's ancient engines straining as it positioned for orbital bombardment. All ships, target defensive emplacements only, Mira ordered as she and her team raced toward extraction. Ground teams are still operating. The space above Galleon Prime erupted in weapons fire as Council ships scrambled to intercept the unexpected attack. But they were disorganized, their command structure disrupted by the shield failures and Ruka's sabotage of their communications network. Legion ships punched through their lines, delivering precision strikes against defense platforms and weapon installations. Aurora's main batteries, silent for years until the Legion's formation, now spoke with thunderous authority, each blast disintegrating Council defenses. As the battle raged in orbit, Mira's team rendezvoused with the other ground units near the command complex. With Council forces distracted by the shield failures and orbital battle, resistance was lighter than expected. Main entrance secured, Harper reported, blood trickling from a cut above her eye. Central command is 2 levels down. Mira nodded, checking the charges on her plasma rifle. Ruka! Inside already, the Naru officer replied over comms. I've sealed the secondary exits. Archon Selk is here, along with the regional command staff. Move in, Mira ordered. The Legion teams breached the command center in a coordinated assault, overwhelming the skeleton security force within seconds. Council officers surrendered immediately, hands raised as human soldiers secured the room. At the center of the chamber stood Archon Selk, tall, imperious, his scaled skin shimmering under the emergency lights. Unlike his subordinates, he showed no fear, only cold contempt. Colonel Landon, he said as Mira approached, her weapon trained on his chest. I wondered when you would arrive. You know who I am? Of course, the human who formed the so-called Vigilant Legion, a primitive response to necessary action. Mira's finger tightened on the trigger. 15,000 refugees, 8,000 colonists on New Anchorage, thousands more across the system. Was that necessary action? Evolutionary inevitability, Selk replied calmly. Young species like yours are inherently destabilizing. The Purity Directive merely accelerates natural selection. Behind her, Mira could hear her soldiers securing the room, downloading data from Council systems, planting charges at key structural points. But her focus remained on Selk, on the being who had ordered the death of so many. Natural selection, she repeated, a dangerous edge in her voice. Is that what you call genocide? Call it what you wish. The outcome is the same. Selk's eyes, vertically slitted like a reptile's, studied her with clinical detachment. You can kill me, Colonel, but the directive will continue. The Council has seen the wisdom of our approach. Mira raised her weapon to Selk's head, finger tightening on the trigger. One shot would end the architect of humanity's near extinction. One shot for justice, for vengeance, for the thousands who would never see Earth again. The room fell silent, all eyes on Mira and the Archon. Colonel! Varen's voice came softly from behind her. He had arrived with the second wave of troops. This isn't why we came. Isn't it? Mira didn't lower her weapon. He gave the order, Ilya. He's the reason they're all dead. And killing him makes us the same as him, Varen replied. We came for the command codes, for the intelligence, not for execution. Selk watched the exchange with apparent fascination. How curious. The human speaks of moral restraint while your forces bombard our installations from orbit. Military targets, Mira snapped. Not civilian transports, not refugee camps. A distinction without difference, Selk dismissed. Death is death. For a long moment, Mira held her position, weapon aimed at the Archon's head. The rage that had driven her since the convoy's destruction demanded satisfaction, demanded that Selk pay the ultimate price for his actions. But something in Varen's words penetrated the haze of anger. If she executed Selk here, unarmed and in custody, what line would she be crossing? What would it mean for the Legion, for humanity's future? Slowly, deliberately, Mira lowered her weapon. Secure the prisoner, she ordered. We're taking him with us. The surprise was evident on the faces of her troops, and in Selk's slitted eyes. Colonel? Harper questioned. The Archon will stand trial for his crimes, Mira explained, in front of representatives from all species affected by the Purity Directive. The galaxy will know what happened here. As Selk was restrained, Ruka approached Mira, her expression unreadable beneath her alien features. "An unexpected choice," the Naru officer observed. "Many in my position would have preferred to see him dead." "Many in my position would have preferred to pull the trigger," Mira admitted. "But this isn't about what we prefer. It's about what comes after." The Legion completed its mission, downloading crucial data from the command center's computers and setting charges to destroy the facility after their departure. With Selk and key Council officers as prisoners, they withdrew to their ships as Council reinforcements began to arrive. The battle above Galion Prime continued as Legion vessels provided cover for the ground team's extraction. Aurora's massive cannons kept Council capital ships at bay, while smaller Legion craft engaged fighter squadrons. By the time Mira's shuttle docked with Aurora, the Legion had achieved its primary objectives. The command center was destroyed, critical intelligence was secured, and Archon Selk was in custody. But the cost had been steep. 3 Legion ships destroyed, hundreds of personnel lost, and an unknown number of Council civilian casualties from atmospheric breaches across Galion Prime. As Aurora and the remaining Legion fleet jumped to hyperspace, Mira stood in the command center, watching the tactical displays transition from battle data to navigation charts. "We've struck a significant blow," Harper said, joining her at the main console. "The intelligence we've gathered will give us Council access codes for their entire regional network." "And we have Selk," Mira added, "the face of the Purity Directive." "A victory worth celebrating," Harper suggested. But Mira couldn't bring herself to feel triumphant. "Check casualty reports from Galion Prime," she ordered quietly. "I want numbers on Council civilian losses." Harper hesitated. "Colonel, with respect, they're Council casualties. After what they did." "They're still lives, Lieutenant," Mira interrupted. "And we're still responsible for our actions." The aftermath of the Galion Prime assault rippled across Council space. News of Archon Selk's capture and the destruction of the regional command center sent shockwaves through the Council's hierarchy. For the first time, the seemingly invincible galactic power had been dealt a significant defeat by a species they had dismissed as primitive and inconsequential. What followed was chaos. With the regional command structure decimated and communication networks compromised, Council forces fragmented. Some continued to pursue the Purity Directive's genocidal campaign against human settlements, while others pulled back, awaiting clear orders from the Central Council. The intelligence gathered from Galion Prime confirmed what Captain Ruka had suggested. The Purity Directive, while influential, did not represent the entirety of Council policy. There were factions within the Council that opposed the extreme measures taken against humanity and other developing species. This division gave the Legion an opportunity. Using the communication codes recovered from the command center, Mira broadcast evidence of the Purity Directive's atrocities to all Council sectors, including testimonies from survivors and Selk's own recorded admissions. "Let them see what's being done in their name," she told her officers. "Let them choose which side of history they want to be on." The strategy bore fruit. Several Council commanders ceased operations against human targets, some even reaching out through back channels to suggest possibilities for negotiation. The monolithic enemy that had seemed unstoppable began to show cracks. But with these cracks came new dangers. Hardline Purity Directive supporters, fearing that their cause might be undermined, intensified their attacks on human settlements. Splinter factions emerged, some even targeting Council facilities that were seen as sympathetic to humanity. 3 weeks after the Galion Prime assault, as Aurora orbited a remote moon where a new Legion base was being established, disaster struck. A stealth craft, using Council identification codes that hadn't been updated in the Legion's database, approached the platform unchallenged. By the time security realized the threat, the craft had already docked. The explosion tore through Aurora's lower decks, killing dozens instantly and causing catastrophic damage to the platform's structural integrity. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, containing the worst of the decompression, but fires raged through adjacent sections. Mira had been in her quarters when the blast hit. The force of the explosion threw her against a bulkhead, the impact knocking her unconscious. When she awoke, emergency lighting bathed the room in crimson, and alarms blared from every speaker. "Colonel!" Harper's voice came through the comm system, distorted by damage to the network. "Colonel Landon, respond!" Mira pulled herself to her feet, ignoring the pain lancing through her side. "I'm here, Lieutenant. Status report. Suicide attack. Lower decks compromised. 18 confirmed dead. Dozens injured. Dr. Varen is coordinating medical response. The attacker? Dead in the explosion. We've identified fragments of Council technology, but the craft itself was unmarked." Mira made her way to the command center, passing through corridors filled with smoke and wounded personnel. Medical teams worked frantically to stabilize the most critical cases, while damage control teams fought to contain fires and seal breaches. When she reached the command center, the situation became clearer and grimmer. The attack had been precisely targeted, damaging Aurora's propulsion systems and weapons capacitors. The platform was crippled, unable to maneuver or defend itself adequately. "We're receiving a transmission," Harper reported, as Mira took her position at the central console. "Council frequency, but not using standard protocols." "Put it through." The main screen flickered, then resolved into the image of a council officer Mira didn't recognize. His scales were darker than silks, marked with ceremonial scarification that identified him as a member of the council's military elite. "Colonel Landon," the officer began without preamble. "I am Commander Vex of the Purity Enforcement Division. You have something that belongs to us?" "If you mean Archon Selk, he's not property," Mira replied coldly. "He's a prisoner awaiting trial for crimes against sentient beings." "Crimes?" Vex's mouth twisted, in what might have been a smile. "The Council does not recognize the concept of crimes against lesser species. Archon Selk was performing his duty. Return him immediately, or what happened to your platform will be merely a prelude to what comes next." "Is that a threat, Commander?" "It is reality, Colonel. We have identified every remaining human settlement in this sector. Either Selk is returned within one planetary rotation, or we begin systematic elimination of those settlements, starting with the largest concentration of human survivors on Titan's southern hemisphere." The transmission ended before Mira could respond. "Can they do it?" Harper asked, her voice tight. "Do they know where all our settlements are?" Mira turned to the tactical display, studying the positions of known Council forces. "They're bluffing about knowing all locations, but they definitely know about Titan Base. It's our largest civilian center, over 12,000 refugees." "We can't evacuate that many people in time," Varen said, entering the command center with medical staff still treating wounded personnel. "Not with Aurora damaged and half our transport fleet on missions elsewhere." "Then, we need another option." Mira activated the secure comm system. "Contact all Legion vessels in range. I want a defensive perimeter around Titan within 6 hours." As the command center staff scrambled to implement her orders, Varen pulled Mira aside. "You're injured," he observed, noting the way she held her side. "You need medical attention." "Later," she dismissed. "We have more urgent concerns." "Mira," Varen lowered his voice, "you know what Vex is really after. This isn't about Selk. It's about breaking the Legion, breaking you." "I know," she grimaced as pain shot through her ribs. "But if they attack Titan Base, thousands will die. Civilians, Ilya, families. And if we give them Selk? Then the Purity Directive continues its campaign, and millions die across dozens of worlds." Mira shook her head. "There's no good choice here." "There seldom is in war," Varen agreed sadly. The Legion marshaled its forces, positioning every available ship in Titan's orbit. Aurora, still damaged from the attack, was moved to a defensive position where its remaining weapons could cover the most likely approach vectors for Council ships. But as the deadline approached, it became clear that the Legion was outmatched. Long-range sensors detected a Council battle group entering the Saturn system, more ships than the Legion could hope to defeat in direct combat. "They'll be in weapons range in 2 hours," Harper reported grimly. "Our defensive screen won't hold against that many capital ships." Mira studied the tactical display, searching for options that didn't exist. The Legion ships were positioned optimally, but there simply weren't enough of them. Aurora's weapons were at partial capacity at best. The civilian evacuation of Titan Base had begun, but only a fraction of the population could be moved before the Council forces arrived. In that moment of desperation, Mira made a decision that would haunt her. "Lieutenant Harper, transmit these coordinates to all Legion vessels," she ordered, entering a series of numbers into the console. "Priority target designation." Harper's eyes widened as she recognized the coordinates. "Colonel, that's Rhea Colony," Mira confirmed. "Current population approximately 3,000 Council administrative personnel and their families." The command center fell silent. "You're suggesting we target civilians," Varen said, the horror evident in his voice. "Council civilians." "I'm suggesting we show Commander Vex exactly what's at stake," Mira replied, her voice hard. "They threatened our civilians. Now they need to understand that their civilians are equally vulnerable." "This isn't right," Varen protested. "These are families, children." "So were the 15,000 on that convoy," Mira cut him off. "So are the 12,000 on Titan they're preparing to annihilate." "And this makes us better how?" Varen demanded. "This makes us different how?" "We give warning," Mira said. "We allow evacuation. We don't fire until everyone who wants to leave has gone. But Vex needs to understand that this escalation has consequences." Harper looked between Mira and Varen, clearly torn. "Colonel, if we do this, we may save Titan Base," Mira finished for her. "Transmit the coordinates, Lieutenant, and prepare a warning message for the Rhea colony." The warning was sent. Legion ships broke from Titan's orbit, repositioning for the strike on Rhea. The message was clear. For every human settlement targeted, a Council settlement would face the same threat. Evacuation ships launched from Rhea's surface almost immediately. Council families, who had never expected to be targets in this conflict, fled in whatever vessels were available. The Legion held its fire, watching as transport after transport lifted from the colony. "Incoming transmission from Commander Vex," Harper announced. The Council commander's face appeared on screen, fury evident in his alien features. "What do you think you're doing, Landon?" "Establishing deterrence, Commander," Mira replied calmly. "You threatened our civilians. We're simply demonstrating that yours are equally vulnerable." "This is an outrage. Those are Council citizens." "And they're being allowed to evacuate," Mira interrupted. "Unlike the refugees your ships destroyed without warning. Unlike the colonists your forces are preparing to eliminate on Titan." Vex's scales darkened with anger. "You would not dare attack a Council colony." "Watch me," Mira's voice was ice. "But it doesn't have to happen. Withdraw your forces from the Saturn system, and we'll stand down ours from Rhea. This is not how warfare is conducted." "This isn't warfare, Commander. According to you, this is evolutionary inevitability. We're simply participating in the process." The standoff lasted 14 tense hours. Legion ships maintained position around Rhea, weapons locked on the colony's key infrastructure. Council forces halted their advance toward Titan, holding just beyond the range of Legion defenses. Finally, a new transmission arrived, not from Commander Vex, but from a Council representative Mira hadn't seen before. "Colonel Landon, I am Counselor Naren of the Diplomatic Corps." The new figure introduced herself. Her scales were paler than Vex's or Selk's, her manner less confrontational. "I have been authorized to negotiate a temporary cessation of hostilities." "I'm listening, Counselor." The Council battle group will withdraw from Saturn space. In exchange, your forces will stand down from Rhea colony, and all evacuation operations will be permitted to proceed unhindered. And Titan base? Mira pressed. Will not be targeted at this time, Naren confirmed. Further negotiations regarding the status of Council human relations will follow through appropriate channels. It wasn't victory, but it was survival, for now. Mira accepted the terms, ordering Legion ships to withdraw from Rhea, but maintain defensive positions around Titan. As the Council battle group began its retreat, the command center staff allowed themselves cautious celebrations. They had faced overwhelming odds and somehow emerged intact. But the cost of that survival weighed heavily on Mira. She had been prepared to target civilian infrastructure, had used thousands of innocent lives as bargaining chips in a desperate gamble. The fact that no weapons had ultimately been fired didn't erase the moral line she had been willing to cross. When the immediate crisis had passed, Mira retreated to her quarters, the enormity of her decision settling over her like a shroud. She had not become a soldier to threaten civilians, regardless of their species or allegiance. Yet, she had given that order without hesitation when Titan base was at risk. A chime at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called, expecting Harper with an update on repairs or council movements. Instead, it was Dr. Varen who stepped inside, his expression grave. "We need to talk, Mira," he said without preamble. "About what happened today. About what almost happened." "We protected our people," Mira replied defensively. "No shots were fired. But they would have been, if the council hadn't backed down." Varen settled into the chair across from her. "You were ready to order the bombardment of a civilian colony. To prevent the destruction of our own civilian colony," Mira countered. "What choice did I have?" "There's always a choice." Varen's voice was soft but firm. "When we formed the Legion, we promised to be better than them, to fight with honor, to protect the innocent regardless of species. And what about our innocent? Who protects them if we're too morally pure to do what's necessary? There's a difference between necessary action and becoming the enemy," Varen insisted. "What happened today crossed that line." Mira stood abruptly, wincing as her injured ribs protested. "So what would you have had me do? Let Vex destroy Titan base? Watch another 15,000 people die because we weren't willing to make hard choices?" "I would have had you find another way," Varen replied simply. "The Mira Landon I've known for 10 years always found another way." His words struck deeper than he knew. Had she changed so much? Had the months of fighting, the constant pressure of command, the weight of so many lives depending on her decisions transformed her into something she wouldn't have recognized before the war began? "Maybe that Mira Landon died with the convoy," she said quietly. "Maybe this is who I need to be now." Varen stood, moving to the viewport beside her. Together, they gazed out at the stars, at the vastness that had once promised humanity unlimited potential, and now seemed filled with threats. "If you believe that," he said finally, "then the Council has already won. They've destroyed something more important than ships or colonies." "And what's that?" "Our humanity." After Varen left, Mira remained at the viewport, his words echoing in her mind. Had she gone too far? Was she becoming the very thing she had sworn to fight against? Or was this simply the inevitable transformation that war demanded, the hardening of heart and spirit necessary for survival? She had no answers, only the cold certainty that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new impossible choices, and the fate of what remained of humanity would rest on her ability to make them. In the days following the Rhea standoff, an uneasy peace settled over the Saturn system. Council forces maintained their distance, and the diplomatic channels opened by Councillor Naren remained active, if tense. For the first time since the initial attacks, humanity had breathing room, a chance to rebuild, to strengthen defenses, to plan for a future that might include more than mere survival. But within the Legion, Fractures were beginning to show. The near strike on Rhea had divided opinion among officers and crews. Some supported Mira's hardline approach, arguing that the Council only respected strength and the willingness to use it. Others, like Varan, worried that the Legion was losing its moral compass in the name of expediency. Aurora underwent repairs, its damaged systems gradually restored to functionality. Mira recovered from her injuries, though the psychological wounds of recent events proved slower to heal. She found herself increasingly isolated, spending more time alone in her quarters or the observation deck, staring out at Titan's hazy atmosphere and the stars beyond. It was during one such solitary moment that Harper found her, a data tablet clutched in her hand and an expression of controlled fury on her face. "Colonel, we have a situation." Mira turned from the viewport. "What is it, Lieutenant?" "Someone has leaked information about the Rhea operation to our civilian leadership on Titan Base." Harper's voice was tight. "Including internal communications where you authorized targeting civilian infrastructure." A cold weight settled in Mira's stomach. "How bad?" "Bad enough. There's already talk of a formal inquiry. Some are calling it a war crime." "A war crime," Mira repeated flatly. "For an operation where no shots were fired and thousands of lives were saved." "I know," Harper agreed, her loyalty evident. "It's absurd. But there's more." She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with what came next. "The leak came from within Aurora's command staff." "Who?" Mira demanded, though she already suspected the answer. "Dr. Varan." The confirmation hit Mira like a physical blow. Ilya, her oldest friend, her most trusted advisor, had betrayed her, had judged her actions and found them wanting. "Where is he now?" "In his quarters, under guard," Harper replied. "He's not denying it. Says it was a matter of conscience." Mira nodded slowly, processing this new reality. "And the rest of the command staff? Where do they stand?" "Divided," Harper admitted. "Some support you completely. Others have concerns about the direction we're taking." "A mutiny in all but name," Mira concluded. "Not yet," Harper insisted. "But if the civilian leadership calls for your removal..." "Then the Legion fragments," Mira finished, "at the worst possible time." The political fallout came swiftly. Representatives from Titan Base and other human settlements formed an emergency council, demanding explanations for the Rhea operation and guarantees against similar actions in the future. Mira stood before this council 2 days later. Aurora's conference room transformed into an impromptu tribunal. Faces both familiar and strange regarded her with emotions ranging from outright hostility to uncomfortable sympathy. "Colonel Landon," began Councilor Rivera, an elder statesman who had once been Earth's ambassador to Mars colonies. "We've reviewed the records of the Rhea operation. Would you care to explain your reasoning?" "Titan Base was under imminent threat," Mira replied, her voice steady. 12,000 civilians faced annihilation. I used the only leverage available to prevent that outcome. By threatening 3,000 Council civilians, another councilor interjected. "By establishing deterrence," Mira corrected. "A concept the Council understands. They threatened our civilians. We demonstrated that theirs were equally vulnerable. No shots were fired. No lives were lost." "This time," Rivera noted. "But your communications make it clear you were prepared to fire if necessary." Mira didn't flinch from the accusation. "Yes, I was prepared to do whatever was required to protect our people." "At the cost of becoming like those we fight against?" The new voice belonged to Dr. Varan, who had been called to testify. He sat apart from the other officers, his position as both witness and accuser making his presence uncomfortable for all. "That's a false equivalence, Doctor," Mira replied, meeting his gaze directly for the first time since his betrayal. "The Council struck without warning, without provocation, against unarmed civilians. We issued clear warnings, allowed full evacuation, and targeted only infrastructure, not people." A distinction that grows increasingly thin, Varen countered. You've spoken of making examples, of showing the Council we can be as ruthless as they are. Where does that path lead, Colonel? What lines won't you cross in the name of victory? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Because in truth, Mira wasn't certain anymore. The boundaries she had once held sacrosanct had blurred during months of desperate fighting. What wouldn't she sacrifice to ensure humanity's survival? What moral principle was worth more than the lives of her people? The tribunal continued for hours, dissecting Mira's decisions, her motivations, the precedent her actions set for future Legion operations. Through it all, she defended her choices without apology, not because she felt no doubt, but because doubt was a luxury a commander couldn't afford. When the Council finally withdrew to deliberate, Mira found herself alone in the corridor outside the conference room, or nearly alone. Lieutenant Harper appeared at her side, her loyalty a constant in the shifting political landscape. "Whatever they decide," Harper said quietly, "you did the right thing. You saved Titan Base." Did I? Mira wondered aloud. Or did I just postpone the inevitable while compromising who we are? With respect, Colonel, philosophical debates about who we are won't matter if we're all dead. Mira smiled faintly at the young officer's pragmatism. Maybe, but Dr. Varen would say that survival without principles isn't survival at all. It's just existence. Dr. Varen isn't responsible for 12,000 lives, Harper countered. You are. You made the hard call. Before Mira could respond, the conference room doors opened. Counselor Rivera emerged, his expression grave. Colonel Landon, the Council has reached a decision. The verdict was both better and worse than Mira had expected. She would retain her rank and position within the Legion, but operational authority would now be shared with a civilian oversight committee. Future strategic decisions, particularly those involving potential civilian casualties, would require committee approval. It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely, but allowed the Legion to maintain its cohesion during a critical period. The alternative, removing Mira from command, risked splitting the human forces at a time when unity was essential for survival. As the Council adjourned, Mira found herself face to face with Dr. Varen in a quiet corner of the conference room. "You got what you wanted," she said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Civilian oversight, checks on military authority." "It wasn't about what I wanted, Mira," Varen replied. "It was about what we need to remain human through all of this." "And if that humanity costs us the war? If moral purity leaves us extinct?" "Then at least we'll have died as ourselves," he said simply. "Not as monsters wearing human faces." The fragile peace established after the Rhea standoff lasted nearly 2 months, long enough for Aurora's repairs to be completed, for Legion forces to be consolidated, for tentative diplomatic channels with moderate council factions to be established. During this time, Mira worked within the new command structure, collaborating with the Civilian Oversight Committee despite her private frustrations with the arrangement. She understood the necessity of maintaining unity, even at the cost of her autonomy as a military commander. But beneath the surface of this apparent stability, dangerous currents were gathering strength. The Purity Directive, humiliated by the Legion's successes and the diplomatic outreach of moderates like Counselor Naren, was planning a final solution to what they called the human problem. Intelligence gathered by Legion operatives and sympathetic Council sources painted an alarming picture. The directive had developed a new weapon, a bioengineered pathogen designed to target human cellular structures specifically. Its planned deployment would affect every human settlement in Council-controlled space simultaneously, potentially killing millions before any response could be organized. This intelligence reached Mira through a secure channel from Captain Ruka, who had continued to provide critical information from within Council ranks. "The weapon is in final testing," Ruka reported during a clandestine communication. "Deployment vehicles are being prepared at 3 facilities across Council space. Once launched, there will be no defense. Time frame? Mira asked, the implications already clear in her mind. 2 weeks, perhaps less? Mira brought this information to the Civilian Oversight Committee immediately, presenting both the threat and her proposed response. A preemptive strike against all 3 development facilities, using every resource the Legion could muster. These facilities are deep in Council space, she explained, highlighting their positions on the tactical display. Heavily defended, with significant civilian populations nearby. But if we don't destroy them before the weapons are deployed, humanity faces extinction. The committee members exchanged troubled glances. You're talking about attacking civilian research centers, Councillor Rivera observed, based on intelligence from a single source. A source that has proven reliable consistently, Mira countered. And these aren't civilian facilities. They're developing weapons of mass destruction specifically to target human civilians. Even so, another committee member interjected. An operation of this scale, with the potential for significant Council civilian casualties. It's precisely the kind of escalation we established this committee to prevent. The debate raged for hours, with Mira growing increasingly frustrated by what she saw as political hesitation in the face of existential threat. The committee wanted more intelligence, more verification, more diplomatic options explored before authorizing a military response. By the time we have the certainty you're demanding, Mira finally snapped, it will be too late. The weapons will be deployed, and we'll be dead. You're asking us to authorize what could amount to a massacre, Rivera replied, his voice tight. Based on fragmentary intelligence and worst-case assumptions. I'm asking you to authorize the protection of our species, Mira corrected, against an enemy that has already demonstrated its willingness to commit genocide. In the end, the committee reached a compromise that satisfied no one. A limited operation was authorized, surveillance of the facilities, with contingency plans for strikes if clear evidence of imminent weapon deployment was detected. But the full-scale preemptive attack Mira had proposed was rejected as too extreme. She left the meeting seething with frustration and fear. The committee's caution, while understandable from a moral perspective, could doom humanity to extinction. The Purity Directive wouldn't hesitate, wouldn't debate ethical nuances. They would simply act, with the brutal efficiency they had demonstrated since the conflict began. In her quarters that night, Mira faced the most difficult decision of her career. Follow the committee's restricted authorization and risk humanity's survival? Or take action on her own authority, knowing it could be viewed as mutiny, but believing it necessary to prevent extinction? The choice tormented her until dawn. When she finally emerged, her decision was made. Lieutenant Harper, she called as she entered the command center. Prepare Aurora for immediate departure. Priority mission, classified parameters. Harper looked up in surprise. Ma'am, the committee hasn't authorized— This isn't a committee operation, Mira interrupted. This is a Legion operation, under my direct command. Notify our most experienced combat teams. Briefing in 1 hour. Word spread quickly through Aurora's crew. Without explicitly stating her intentions, Mira had made it clear she was proceeding without committee authorization. It was a line crossed, perhaps the final one. Dr. Varon confronted her as she prepared for the mission briefing. You can't do this, Mira, he said, his voice low but intense. You're violating direct orders from civilian leadership. I'm preventing the extinction of our species, she replied, not looking up from the tactical displays she was reviewing. Something the committee seems unwilling to do. The committee is trying to preserve our humanity while surviving. Varon argued. There's a balance. There's no balance with extinction. Mira cut him off. The directive is preparing to deploy bioweapons against every human settlement in Council space. Millions will die if we don't stop them now. And how many Council civilians will die in your attack? Have you calculated that cost? Now, Mira did look up, her eyes hard. Everyone that needs to if it means our people survive. Varan stepped back as if struck. You've changed, Mira. The colonel I knew is adapting to reality, she finished for him. As we all must. The mission launched 12 hours later. Aurora, accompanied by 6 Legion warships, departed Titan orbit on a course that would take them deep into Council territory. The official explanation provided to the Civilian Oversight Committee was a reconnaissance operation authorized under the limited parameters they had approved. But the weaponry Aurora carried, the combat teams aboard, and the mission briefings Mira conducted made the true purpose clear to everyone involved. This was a strike mission, a final effort to eliminate the bioweapon threat before it could be deployed. As Aurora entered hyperspace, Mira stood in the command center, watching the starfield stretch and distort around them. She was acutely aware of the weight of her decision, the lives at stake, the principles compromised, the trust broken. But in her mind, there was no alternative. Humanity's survival depended on decisive action, not committee debates. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that even as Aurora departed, Lieutenant Harper was transmitting a secure message to the Civilian Oversight Committee, detailing Mira's plans, the target selected, and the likelihood of significant civilian casualties. Harper, who had stood by Mira through every previous crisis, had finally reached her own moral limit. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, Council sensors detected the Legion fleet's hyperspace signature, tracking its trajectory toward the bioweapon facilities. Warnings were issued, defenses activated, and a trap began to close around Aurora and its companion ships. The battle, when it came, was swift and devastating. Aurora emerged from hyperspace near the first target facility, weapons charged and strike teams ready for deployment. But waiting for them was a Council battle group 3 times the size of their intelligence estimates, a force that had clearly been expecting their arrival. "Ambush!" Harper called, as targeting alarms blared across the command center. "Multiple capital ships, fighter squadrons launching. They knew we were coming." Mira processed this betrayal in an instant. "Evasive maneuvers, all ships. Defensive formation Delta, launch countermeasures." Aurora shuddered as the first Council salvos impacted its shields. The massive platform, never designed for agile movement, struggled to respond to the helmsman's desperate inputs. Around it, the smaller Legion vessels executed tight defensive patterns, their point defense systems creating a web of covering fire. "We can't reach the facility," Varen reported from the tactical station. "Council ships have established a blockade perimeter. Our approach vectors are all covered." "Find me a weakness," Mira ordered. "We need to get our strike teams to that facility." But there was no weakness to find. The Council forces had prepared thoroughly, positioning their ships to create overlapping fields of fire that made any approach to the planet suicidal. And with each passing minute, more Council vessels arrived, strengthening the already formidable blockade. "Colonel," Harper said, her voice tight with controlled panic, "we're losing shield integrity on decks 12 through 17. 2 of our escort ships are reporting critical damage." Mira studied the tactical display, searching for options that didn't exist. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and running out of time. The mission, her mission, had failed before it truly began. "All ships, prepare for emergency hyperspace jump," she ordered, the words like ash in her mouth. "Coordinates Delta 79er." The retreat was chaotic and costly. 2 Legion ships, too damaged to initiate hyperspace jumps, were left behind, their crews evacuating to Aurora in desperate shuttle runs under heavy fire. Council pursuit ships harried them even as they prepared to jump, inflicting additional damage on Aurora's already compromised systems. When they finally escaped into hyperspace, the cost was clear. 2 ships lost, dozens of personnel killed or wounded, and Aurora itself severely damaged. Worse, the bioweapon facilities remained intact, their deadly cargo still on schedule for deployment. in Aurora's medical bay, converted to an emergency triage center for the wounded. Mira moved among the injured, the weight of failure crushing down on her. These people had trusted her, had followed her on an unauthorized mission because they believed in her judgment, and she had led them into a trap. "Colonel," Dr. Varen's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He stood in the doorway, his medical uniform stained with blood from treating the wounded. "Command center, now." There was something in his tone, a finality, a grimness, that told Mira everything she needed to know. She followed him without question, through corridors damaged by weapons fire, past repair teams working frantically to stabilize the platform systems. The command center was eerily quiet when they arrived. Officers stood at their stations, but there was a tension in the air that went beyond the aftermath of battle. Lieutenant Harper stood near the central console, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. And beside her stood Counselor Rivera, accompanied by 2 Legion security officers. "Colonel Landon," Rivera began formally, "by authority of the Civilian Oversight Committee, you are hereby relieved of command, effective immediately. You will surrender all access codes and report to the brig pending formal charges." Mira absorbed the words without visible reaction, though inside, something crumbled. Charges? Mutiny. Endangering Legion personnel without authorization. Actions potentially resulting in civilian casualties. Rivera recited the list without emotion. "Lieutenant Harper has provided evidence of your deliberate violation of committee directives." Mira turned to Harper, the betrayal cutting deeper than she would have thought possible. "You..." Harper met her gaze steadily. "I'm sorry, Colonel, but this isn't who we are. This isn't who you taught me to be." The security officers approached, their discomfort evident, but their duty clear. Mira could have resisted, could have called on the loyalty of the crew members who still believed in her. But what would that accomplish, beyond deepening the divisions that already threatened to tear the Legion apart? "I'll go quietly," she said, removing her command insignia and placing it on the console. "But understand this. The bioweapon threat is real. If you don't find a way to neutralize those facilities, humanity faces extinction." "We are aware of the threat," Rivera assured her. "Captain Ruka's intelligence has been verified by other sources. But we will address it through means that don't compromise who we are." As the security officers escorted her from the command center, Mira caught a final glimpse of her crew, of the people she had led through months of desperate fighting. Some wouldn't meet her eyes. Others watched with sympathy or confusion. A few, like Dr. Varen, regarded her with a mixture of sadness and resolution. She had lost more than her command. She had lost their trust, their belief in her judgment. Perhaps she had lost something of herself as well. The brig was small, but not uncomfortable. A concession to her rank, perhaps, or to the service she had rendered before her fall. Mira sat on the narrow bunk, staring at the blank wall opposite, replaying the events that had led to this moment. Where had she gone wrong? When had the path of necessary action become the road to moral compromise? Had it been at Rhea, when she first threatened civilian targets? Earlier, when she spared Selk instead of executing him? Or was it more recent, the moment she decided that committee approval was an obstacle to be circumvented, rather than a check on potential excess? Hours blended into days as Aurora limped back toward Titan. Occasionally, officers would visit, Dr. Varen bringing medical attention for her injuries, Lieutenant Harper providing terse updates on repairs and Legion activities. But mostly, Mira was alone with her thoughts, with the crushing weight of failure and betrayal. It was during this solitary confinement that news reached her of the Legion's response to the bioweapon threat. Not a military strike as she had planned, but a diplomatic initiative, leveraging Counselor Naren's moderate faction and the evidence Captain Ruka had provided to expose the Purity Directive's plans to the broader Council leadership. To Mira's surprise, the strategy worked, Moderate council factions, already concerned about the directive's increasingly extreme measures, moved to suppress the bioweapon program. The facilities were placed under council quarantine, their directors arrested, their research confiscated. The Purity Directive itself was officially disbanded, its most radical members facing council justice for their unauthorized actions against humanity and other developing species. Archon Selk, still in Legion custody, would stand trial not only before human courts, but before the Council's own judicial assembly. It was a victory, perhaps the most significant since the conflict began, and it had been achieved without firing a shot, without risking civilian lives, without crossing the moral lines Mira had been prepared to cross. The irony was not lost on her. When Aurora finally reached Titan, Mira was transferred to a detention facility on the moon's surface to await formal tribunal. The charges against her were serious. Mutiny during wartime carried the possibility of execution, though most believed such an extreme sentence unlikely given her previous service. The tribunal, when it finally convened, was held in a converted assembly hall near Titan Base's administrative center. Representatives from all remaining human settlements attended, along with key Legion officers and civilian officials. Dr. Varen was there, as was Lieutenant Harper, both called to testify about Mira's actions and the events leading to her removal from command. The proceedings lasted 5 days, examining not only the unauthorized mission that had led to Mira's arrest, but the entire pattern of her command decisions since the formation of the Vigilant Legion, the RIA operation, the treatment of council prisoners, the escalating willingness to accept civilian casualties. All were scrutinized in exhaustive detail. Through it all, Mira maintained her position. Every decision she had made, including the final unauthorized mission, had been in service to humanity's survival. She expressed regret for the casualties suffered, but not for the intent behind her actions. In war, we are faced with impossible choices, she told the tribunal during her final statement. I chose survival, not just for myself, not just for Aurora's crew, but for our species. If that choice led me across lines others wouldn't cross, I accept that judgment. But I cannot and will not apologize for doing everything in my power to ensure humanity's future. The tribunal's verdict, delivered on the 6th day, was both justice and mercy. Mira was formally stripped of her rank and command, permanently barred from military service. But in recognition of her earlier leadership during humanity's darkest hours, she was spared imprisonment. Instead, she would be exiled to a monitoring station on Titan's surface, isolated, but free to live out her days under minimal supervision. As the tribunal concluded, Mira stood to hear the final pronouncement of her sentence. The assembly hall was silent, the faces around her solemn. These were people she had fought to protect, had been willing to compromise her principles to save. Now, they regarded her as something between a fallen hero and a cautionary tale. She accepted the verdict without visible emotion, though inside, a storm raged. What would she be now, without her rank, without her command, without the purpose that had driven her since the conflict began? As she was escorted from the hall, a small figure broke away from the crowd, a child, perhaps 10 years old, with features that reminded Mira painfully of the refugees she had once watched die aboard the convoy. Colonel? The girl asked hesitantly, using the title Mira no longer held. Mira stopped, the security officers tensing beside her. Yes? My name is Alara. My parents were on the Enceladus convoy, the escape pod you sent Legion ships to rescue. The girl's eyes were serious, too old for her young face. They told me what you did, how you saved us when no one else would. Mira didn't know what to say. This child, one life preserved among thousands lost, stood before her like an embodiment of all she had fought for, all she had sacrificed her principles to protect. I did what I had to do, she finally managed. I know, Alara replied simply. Thank you. The security officers gently urged Mira forward, away from the child and the crowd, toward the transport that would take her to her exile. But that brief encounter stayed with her, a reminder that amid the moral compromises and tactical decisions, real lives had hung in the balance, lives now continuing because of choices she had made, however questionable some had been. 3 months into her exile, Mira had established a routine of sorts. The monitoring station was isolated, but self-sufficient, perched on a ridge overlooking one of Titan's methane seas. From its observation deck, she could watch the orange haze of the moon's atmosphere, catching Saturn's distant light, creating an alien sunset that never failed to inspire awe. She maintained the station's systems, monitored atmospheric conditions as required by her sentence, and spent long hours walking the reinforced paths that wound around the facility. It was a quiet existence, so different from the frenetic pace of command that she sometimes felt as if she had stepped into another life entirely. News from the broader conflict reached her through periodic supply deliveries and the occasional visitor. The diplomatic initiatives begun after her removal from command had continued to bear fruit. Moderate council factions, horrified by the Purity Directive's excesses, had established formal relations with human representatives. The fighting had largely ceased, replaced by tentative cooperation and the slow rebuilding of trust. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was no longer war, and it had been achieved through the very means she had dismissed as ineffective: dialogue, compromise, appeals to common interest, rather than threats of mutual destruction. On a cold, Titan evening, as Mira completed her daily circuit of the station's perimeter, she spotted an unexpected sight: a shuttle descending toward the landing pad. Visitors were rare at the monitoring station, scheduled weeks in advance. This arrival was unannounced. She watched from a distance as the shuttle settled onto the pad, its engines cycling down with a diminishing whine. The hatch opened, and a familiar figure emerged: Dr. Varen, wrapped in the heavy environmental suit necessary for Titan's surface conditions. Mira waited as he made his way toward her, his movements awkward in the protective gear. They hadn't spoken since the tribunal, their decade-long friendship another casualty of the choices she had made. Dr. Varen, she greeted him formally when he reached her position. "This is unexpected." "Mira," he replied, his voice slightly distorted through the suit's communication system. "May we talk inside?" In the station's small common area, Varen removed his helmet, revealing features that had aged noticeably in the months since they'd last met. The conflict had taken its toll on everyone, it seemed. "You look well," he observed, studying her with a physician's eye. "Exile agrees with you." "It's quiet," Mira acknowledged. "Gives me time to think. Too much time, sometimes." Varen nodded, understanding the weight of solitude and reflection. "I've brought news," he said, settling into one of the station's utilitarian chairs. "The Council's central authority has formally censured the remaining Purity Directive supporters. Archon Selk's trial concluded last week. He's been sentenced to permanent exile on a mining colony." "Justice of a sort," Mira commented, remembering the moment she had chosen to spare Selk's life in the ruined halls of Galian Prime. A decision that had seemed morally clear then, though so many after had become clouded. "There's more," Varen continued. "Captain Ruka has been appointed as liaison between the Council's diplomatic corps and human representatives. She's advocating for a formal alliance, one that would recognize humanity's autonomy while providing Council protection." "Protection," Mira repeated with a hint of her old bitterness. "From the same Council that nearly exterminated us." "From a faction within the Council," Varen corrected gently. "A faction that's now been dismantled. The diplomatic approach is working. Mira, the very approach you dismissed as ineffective." She looked away, gazing through the viewport at Titan's alien landscape. "I'm glad," she said finally, surprising herself with the sincerity of the admission. If peace is possible. It's what we fought for, isn't it? In the beginning, at least. Before survival became vengeance, Varen observed, not unkindly. Perhaps, Mira turned back to him. But you didn't come all this way to update me on political developments. What's really brought you here, Ilya? Varan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. The Oversight Committee is being restructured, transformed into a more permanent governing body for what remains of humanity. They're calling it the Titan Accord. Good. We need stable civilian leadership. They've asked me to join as a representative of the scientific community, Varen continued, to help shape policy for our future interactions with the Council and other species. You'll be excellent, Mira said, meaning it. Your moral compass never wavered, even when mine did. That's just it, Mira, Varen leaned forward. I've declined unless they also extend an invitation to you. She stared at him, genuinely shocked. Me? I'm a convicted mutineer, permanently stripped of rank, an exile. You're also the woman who formed the Vigilant Legion when no one else would act, who saved thousands of lives through strategic brilliance and sheer determination. Varen's eyes held hers steadily. Yes, you crossed lines. Yes, you made mistakes. But your perspective, your understanding of both what we faced and what we became in facing it, is invaluable. The committee would never agree, Mira said, though something forgotten stirred within her, a sense of purpose, of potential contribution beyond her isolated existence. They already have, Varen replied. Conditionally. That's the other reason I'm here. He reached into a pocket of his environmental suit, retrieving a small data chip which he placed on the table between them. What's this? Intelligence from Captain Ruka, Varen explained. Intercepted communications from beyond Council space. A new species, previously unknown, observing our conflict from a distance. They've been monitoring the Purity Directive's activities with concerning interest. Mira picked up the chip, turning it in her fingers. A new threat? Potentially, or a new opportunity for alliance. That's for the committee to determine, with advisors who understand both diplomacy and strategy. Varen's meaning was clear. They need you, Mira, not as a commander, but as someone who's seen the darkest potential of interspecies conflict and learned from it. She set the chip down carefully, her mind already processing implications, possibilities, contingencies, the strategic thinking that had once been as natural as breathing. And if I refuse, return to my exile and methane sunsets? Then I respect your choice, Varen said simply. But I don't think you will. Not when there's still work to be done. Not when humanity still needs you. Perhaps in a different capacity than before. But no less vital. Mira rose, moving to the viewport again, below the station. Titan's methane sea rippled with alien currents, while above, Saturn's rings gleamed in the distant sunlight. She had found a measure of peace here, in this isolation, had begun to reconcile with the choices she had made, the lines she had crossed, the person she had become during the desperate months of conflict. But peace wasn't the same as purpose. When do they need my answer? She asked, still facing the viewport. The shuttle leaves tomorrow morning, Varen replied, though I'd be welcome to stay longer, if you need time to consider. Mira turned back to him, a faint smile touching her lips, for perhaps the first time since her exile began. No need. I've had months of solitude to consider my past. Perhaps it's time to consider a future instead. Varan's relief was evident. Then you'll come? As an advisor only, she cautioned. I have no illusions about redemption or restored authority. Just your perspective, Varen agreed. Your experience. Your understanding of both what we fight against and what we fight to preserve. That evening, as Titan's perpetual haze dimmed with Saturn's setting, Mira packed the few personal possessions she had accumulated during her exile. There wasn't much. Some books, a few keepsakes from Aurora, the tactical journals she had kept to organize her thoughts. As she worked, she found herself thinking of Alara, the child from the tribunal, whose parents had survived the convoy attack that had set everything in motion. One life connected to others, preserved against overwhelming odds. A reminder that behind the grand strategies and moral compromises were real people, with futures now possible because of actions taken, however questionable some had been. Perhaps that was the lesson she needed to carry forward, that survival alone wasn't enough. What mattered was what survived along with the body, the principles, the humanity, the capacity for both strength and compassion that defined what it meant to be human. The next morning, Mira stood on the landing pad beside Dr. Varen, her single bag at her feet as they waited for the shuttle's pre-flight checks to complete. She took a final look at the monitoring station that had been her home and prison these past months, at the alien landscape that had witnessed her solitary reckoning. "Having second thoughts?" Varen asked, noting her contemplative gaze. "No," Mira replied, "just saying goodbye to exile, and perhaps to the person I was when I arrived here." "And who will you be now?" She considered the question as the shuttle's engines began to power up, their rising hum vibrating through the pad beneath her feet. "Someone who remembers both the necessity of survival and its cost," she said finally. "Someone who knows that vengeance may win wars, but only compassion rebuilds afterward." "That sounds like someone the committee needs," Varen observed. "Someone humanity needs." As they boarded the shuttle, Mira carried with her not just the physical reminders of her past, but the lessons learned through victory and defeat, through command and exile. The path ahead was uncertain, a new potential threat emerging beyond known space, a fragile piece still taking root, a human society rebuilding from near extinction. But uncertainty had been humanity's constant companion since the first ships ventured beyond Earth's atmosphere. It was in facing that uncertainty, together, with both courage and conscience, that they would define themselves anew. The shuttle lifted off, rising through Titan's orange haze toward the stars beyond. Below, the methane sea receded, its alien currents a reminder of how far humanity had come, and how far they might yet go, if they remembered both the strength that ensured survival and the principles that made survival meaningful. Mira Landon, once colonel, once exile, now advisor to humanity's future, watched as Titan fell away beneath them. Not an ending, she realized, but a continuation, another chapter in humanity's story among the stars. A story that, despite everything, remained unfinished. And in the vast darkness between stars, beyond the reach of council sensors or human outposts, other eyes watched, calculating, considering the species that had survived extinction and might yet prove either ally or obstacle to powers unknown. The aurora of a gas giant shimmered across an observation deck, not unlike Mira's abandoned station. A figure stood silhouetted against that iridescent display, reviewing the intercepted communications that detailed humanity's desperate fight and improbable survival. "Interesting," the figure murmured to companions unseen. "Most interesting indeed." A new game was beginning, and humanity, tempered by fire and ice, would soon be called to play. On Titan, in the abandoned monitoring station, a single light remained active. A communication terminal Mira had deliberately left powered. On its screen, a message waited for whoever might next inhabit this solitary outpost. "Remember what we fought for. Remember what we almost became. And remember that survival without humanity is merely existence. The stars offer both promise and peril. Navigate with both courage and conscience." Aurora's dawn had broken. What it illuminated remained to be seen.